He laughed, "She's the family clown," and everyone joined. My next words shut them down as I exposed their hypocrisy and forced them to face how cruelly they'd treated me for years. My name is Maya, I'm 28, and if I had to describe my family in one sentence, it would be this. In our house, laughter was a blade, not a comfort. My whole life I'd been the funny one, the clumsy one, the family's accidental court jester. When I was 8 and fell off my bike, they recorded it and sent the video to relatives with the caption, "Free mood booster." That was the tone of my childhood. Amusement at my expense, disguised as affection. My mom, Ellen, lived obsessed with appearances, always worried about what the neighbors might whisper. My dad, Greg, quiet but the loudest laugher when the joke was on me. And my older brother Nate, 32, golden boy, basketball star, handsome, adored by everyone, especially our mother. At 24, I finally escaped Siena Falls, Ohio, found a UI designer job in Minneapolis, rented a tiny apartment, and tried to build a life where I wasn't a punchline. But every family call, every visit, they still saw the same awkward girl meant to be teased for entertainment. A month before everything happened, they invited me to a mandatory family dinner. Nate wanted to introduce his new girlfriend, Haley. Mom added, "Please don't embarrass yourself, Maya. Dress nicely this time." I already knew the evening would be unpleasant. I just didn't know how much. The dinner was held at my parents' house, the kind of staged perfection my mother lived for. White tablecloth, polished silverware, candles flickering like we were hosting foreign diplomats instead of just ourselves. I arrived a few minutes late, the cold still clinging to my coat, and before I even stepped fully into the dining room, I heard my brother's voice. Nate was already in full performance mode. "Remember when Maya tried to dye her own hair and ended up looking like a bag of gummy worms?" The table erupted. Haley clapped her hands like a delighted child. Mom wiped tears from her eyes, gasping for breath between laughs. Dad shook his head with that familiar grin, the one that always said, "What can you do? That's just Maya." I hadn't even taken off my coat. I sat down quietly, hoping the moment would pass. But humiliation, once it starts rolling in my family, never stops on its own. It's a snowball with an endless slope. They took turns after that, each adding their own light-hearted jab. "Mom, so Maya, how's the toy industry these days?" Me, "It's not." Dad, "You know designers, honey. They're just programmers who couldn't make it." Mom laughed as if he'd delivered a punchline worthy of late-night television. Then Nate chimed in, lifting his wine glass. "Don't worry, everyone. Glasses tonight are shatterproof. We made sure. Just for Maya." More laughter. Haley practically folded over the table. A waiter in a restaurant would have asked if I wanted to change seats. A friend would have nudged me under the table. But family? They were too busy enjoying the show. The wine was poured, and as the glass reached me, Nate said loudly, "Careful, Maya. Don't baptize the whole table this time." The laughter was instant, reflexive, like a chorus so rehearsed it no longer needed a conductor. And then the line that cut deeper than I expected. Mom sighed fondly. "Oh, come on, everyone. Let her be. You know Maya. She's always been our little clown. Life of the party. There are 1,000 ways to be unseen." That one felt like a spotlight shining on everything I'd worked to outgrow. They didn't mean to be cruel. That's what I used to tell myself. They just didn't know any different. They had built a version of me years ago, and instead of wondering whether I'd changed, they kept polishing that old caricature like it was a family heirloom. But Nate, he always knew exactly where to hit. When the appetizers arrived, he leaned toward Haley, grinning. "Oh, you're gonna love this," he said. "Later I'll show you the video of Maya at prom falling on her face while trying to dance. Absolute classic." My stomach clenched. That video had been my personal nightmare for a decade. Shaky footage taken by one of Nate's friends. Posted in a group chat where I didn't belong. Calmly, I said, "Delete that video." Nate blinked at me, then barked a laugh. "God, Maya, relax. It's just humor. Everyone knows you're the family comic relief." Comic relief. A role I never auditioned for, never wanted. I felt something shift inside me, a quiet snap, not loud enough for anyone to notice, but sharp enough that I felt it echo through my bones. It wasn't anger exactly, more like clarity. A cold, precise understanding that this wasn't just teasing. This was tradition. A tradition built on my humiliation. And the worst part? They genuinely thought I should be grateful for it. Haley leaned forward, smiling sympathetically in a way that wasn't sympathetic at all. I think it's cute, actually. Every family needs someone fun. Fun. Like a party trick. Like a mascot. The ground didn't just tilt. It opened beneath me. I sat there, surrounded by laughter, and felt more alone than I had in years. It wasn't the jokes that broke me. It was the realization that not a single person at that table wondered how it felt to be the punchline. It happened so quickly, yet so quietly, that no one at the table realized the night had already begun to split in half. Haley turned to me with an innocent smile. The kind of smile people wear when they don't understand they're walking into a minefield. So, is it true you live in one of those cheaper neighborhoods? Nate said you're kinda struggling with money. He even offered to lend you some to buy a decent pillow. I think, she said it gently, curiously. No cruelty, no mockery, which somehow made it sting even deeper. Because it meant Nate had been talking about me behind my back. Not just joking about my clumsiness. He was discussing my finances, my private life, my vulnerabilities, turning them into entertainment. I looked at him slowly. He didn't flinch. He just sat there, wearing that relaxed, confident smile. The smile of a man who has never once believed his behavior could have consequences. And then he delivered the line that shifted the axis of the entire evening. Guys, come on. Maya's our family clown. That's why we love her. She keeps the mood light. The table erupted. My mother let out a bright, delighted laugh. My father shook his head in amused disbelief. Haley leaned into Nate like he'd just said something charming. Everyone laughed. Loudly, freely, unashamedly. Everyone except me. And that was the moment I felt something inside me freeze. They didn't see what they were doing. They didn't question whether it hurt. They believed, genuinely believed, that I owed them this role. That humiliation was my contribution to the family. I set down my glass deliberately and said, in the same tone someone might use to comment on the weather, "All right, then let's see who the real clown is." The laughter evaporated so fast it was almost funny. Nate blinked, eyebrows inching up, his smile faltering for the first time that night. "Maya, what?" he asked, half laughing, half confused. I didn't yell. I didn't tremble. My voice was calm enough to make my mother's posture stiffen. I took out my phone, placed it gently on the table like a dealer laying down cards. "Nate," I said, "would you like me to show everyone your little funny secret?" The color drained from his face instantly. Because he knew. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew there were things I could reveal. Things he desperately didn't want our parents, his girlfriend, or anyone else at that table to hear. His debts that he'd disguised as investments. The job he lost last year for performance inconsistency, which definitely wasn't the story he'd told Mom. The credit card mess he hid by claiming bank error. The weekend he disappeared, pretending he was at a tournament, when he was really in Cleveland trying to fix a situation involving a friend and a damaged rental car. But I didn't choose any of those. Those could still be twisted, minimized, brushed off as life happens. No, I chose the truth he couldn't laugh away. The truth that didn't bend into a joke. I opened the screen, tapped a folder I'd never meant to use. A folder that existed because I'd once thought maybe one day Nate would grow up, and I would never need to use it against him. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't rise. I looked him directly in the eyes and said, "You want laughter, Nate? Then let's give everyone something real to laugh about." He swallowed hard. Mom's mouth tightened. Haley tilted her head like she was trying to decode a foreign language. The room went utterly still. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one trapped under the spotlight. I was the one holding it. "You know," I said softly, almost conversationally, "it's funny how you all love saying people should learn to take a joke." I lifted my eyes to meet each face at the table. My mother frozen. My father confused. Haley politely attentive. Nate visibly sweating. But the thing is, I continued, your jokes only ever go one way. I unlocked my phone, scrolled to a folder I'd never intended to use as ammunition but had kept out of habit. The way someone keeps old burns to remind themselves not to touch fire again. The family group chat. I opened video after video. Clips of me falling, tripping, being startled, struggling with something as everyone behind the camera laughed. I opened the screenshots, conversations where they talked about me as though I were some sitcom character written for their amusement. I turned the screen toward the table. For years, I said quietly. I stayed silent. I laughed when you laughed. I pretended it didn't hurt. But now everyone can see exactly how you joke. Mom's face drained of color instantly. Dad's brow furrowed like he was trying to solve a math problem. Haley covered her mouth, eyes wide. Nate broke first. Maya, what the hell? That's just family humor. I let out a small breath. Not a laugh, not anger. Something colder, steadier. Family humor, I repeated. So if I play the recording of you calling Haley a cute but kinda dumb little nurse, that's family humor too? Haley jerked around so fast her hair whipped her shoulder. I'm sorry, what? Nate's face collapsed. Maya, don't. But I already tapped play. The audio filled the room. Crisp, undeniable. Nate's voice, careless and smug, saying, yeah, she's pretty, but not the brightest. Honestly, she's more of a cute little nurse mascot than a real partner. But whatever. She looks good on my arm. 18 seconds. That was all it took. When it ended, the silence was so heavy it felt like gravity had doubled. You could have heard a fork drop into the carpet. Haley stared at him as if he'd become someone unrecognizable. Mom's lips parted, as though she wanted to defend him but couldn't find a single word. Dad leaned back slowly, shoulders sinking under a weight he'd never expected to carry. Nate's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That was taken out of context, he attempted. There is no context, I said softly, in which that sentence becomes something noble. Haley backed away from him slightly, almost subconsciously, like her body understood something her mind wasn't ready to process. How long? She said quietly. Have you talked about me like that? Nate stammered. It was a joke, Hales. Come on. Everyone jokes. Maya's just twisting. For once, I interrupted. I'm not the one being twisted. I set my phone down gently. My hands were steady. For the first time in years, I felt grounded, present. Not shrinking, not apologizing for existing. Nate glared at me, panic beginning to curdle into anger. Are you trying to ruin my relationship? No, I said calmly. You did that yourself. I'm just holding up the mirror. Haley exhaled a shaky breath. Mom looked away. Dad's jaw tightened. It was strange watching the shift ripple across the table, the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, the family clown wasn't the one making this ugly. Maybe the ugliness had been there all along, and I was simply done pretending not to see it. Haley pushed her chair back so abruptly it scraped against the hardwood. Her eyes were glossy, her breath uneven. She looked between me and Nate as though trying to reconcile two completely different versions of reality. The one he'd sold her, and the one she'd just heard with her own ears. She grabbed her purse without a word. Mom lunged forward verbally, desperate to regain control of the scene. Maya, enough. This has crossed a line. Crossed a line. I let out a short, sharp laugh. That's interesting, because when you spent years laughing at me, that was fine. When you sent videos of my worst moments to the family chat, fine. When Nate discussed my finances with complete strangers, fine. When you all called me a clown, perfectly acceptable. Her face twitched, the way it always did when someone disrupted her curated image of moral high ground. Dad cleared his throat, straightening his back like he was preparing for one of his father of the house lectures. You're being disrespectful, Maya, he said sternly. Disrespectful. I stared him dead in the eyes. Disrespectful is raising a child to believe their pain is entertainment. Disrespectful is treating me like a prop in your family show. Disrespectful is pretending this is love. What I'm doing right now, I tapped my phone lightly on the table, is honesty. And the only reason it feels harsh is because you're not used to hearing it. Dad's mouth closed. He didn't have a rebuttal for that. Nate, of course, erupted. What is wrong with you? Seriously, are you trying to blow up the entire family over some jokes? You're acting crazy. But his voice cracked, fear slipping through the cracks of his arrogance. The same thing that's been wrong this whole time, I said softly. The only difference is that I finally stopped swallowing it. Haley's composure snapped then. Her voice was small but razor-sharp. So that's what you really think of me? She whispered to Nate. Baby, come on. He started, reaching for her arm. She jerked away from him like his touch burned. You humiliated me too, she said. Just like you humiliate her. And then she walked out. The front door slammed so hard the walls trembled. A framed photo rattling against the plaster. For a moment, no one moved. Mom leaned toward Nate, whispering fiercely, What on earth did you tell her? What were you thinking? Dad just sat there with his face in his hands, elbows on the table, the weight of everything finally settling across his shoulders. And I stood there, for the first time in my life, without fear, without shrinking, without waiting for someone else to dictate the mood in the room. There was no applause, no cinematic swell of victory music, just a deep, vibrating silence. The kind that comes after a storm has ripped through and left the air clearer than before. Mom looked up at me with something unfamiliar in her expression. Not anger, not mockery, but the first flicker of realization. Nate glared at me like I had committed some unforgivable betrayal. Dad looked like a man trying to add up the years and finally seeing the equation was wrong. And me? I simply breathed, steady, unshaken. For the first time in 28 years, they weren't laughing. They were looking, really looking. And they didn't like what they saw, not because of me, but because, for the first time ever, the mirror was facing the right direction. The evening cracked apart from there. Nate shouted that I'd ruined his life, that I'd destroyed his relationship. As if the words on that recording weren't his own. Mom accused me of betrayal, like loyalty meant letting them hurt me indefinitely. Dad kept repeating, "We don't air our dirty laundry." As though the stains hadn't already been on display for years. But the train had already left the station. There was no going back to the version of me who laughed along. The next morning, Haley called. Her voice was steadier than I expected. "Thank you," she said. "I knew something felt off with him. I just didn't know how deep it went." A week later, the fallout hit Nate harder than he ever imagined. His new job, the one he bragged about nonstop, let him go. Apparently, they'd already had concerns about his behavior, his inconsistency. The dinner incident was simply the last straw. Mom tried to arrange a family meeting, but I didn't show up. Instead, I sent a single message. I will not participate in any conversation until respect is present on all sides. She responded with paragraphs. I didn't read them. Dad mailed me a card, a blank one. No apology, no justification, no attempts at wisdom. Just empty space. Maybe that was fitting. Maybe it was the first honest thing he'd ever given me. As for me, I didn't feel triumph, or gloating, or the electric rush of revenge. I felt quiet, a deep, grounded silence that settled in my chest like I finally had room to breathe. No static, no laughter aimed at me like a dart, no shrinking myself to fit a role I never asked for. Just freedom. And in that stillness, I understood something simple and sharp. Sometimes you don't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes the truth, spoken calmly, without fear, does the tearing down for you. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop performing the role someone else wrote for you and walk away while the walls they built against you collapse under their own weight.